The clock on the wall ticked away the last minutes of the day, its rhythmic beat the only sound in the stillness of my tiny apartment. I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the stack of bills that had taken up permanent residence on the kitchen table. The rent was overdue, the utilities were on the brink of being shut off, and the thought of how I'd afford groceries next week gnawed at my insides. It was a struggle I knew all too well, juggling the demands of single motherhood, working long hours as a nurse, and still barely scraping by. I rubbed my temples, trying to ward off the headache that had been building all evening. Sleep had become a rare commodity these days, and the exhaustion weighed heavily on me. But just as I considered turning in for the night, my phone buzzed loudly on the coffee table, making me jump. The screen displayed an unknown number, and for a brief second I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something inside me nudged me to pick up. "Hello," I answered, my voice hoarse with fatigue. "Chloe? Oh, thank goodness you picked up." The voice on the other end was trembling, filled with a mix of fear and desperation. It took me a moment to place it. "Mrs. Henderson?" I asked, sitting up straighter, the fob of exhaustion lifting slightly. Mrs. Henderson lived a few houses down, a sweet older woman who I'd occasionally seen tending to her garden or walking with her husband. "Yes, it's me." "I'm so sorry to bother you, but it's Charles. He's not well, Chloe. I don't know what to do. He collapsed, and I'm so scared." Her voice cracked, the terror in it slicing through my own tiredness like a knife. "Don't worry, Mrs. Henderson. I'll be right there," I said, already reaching for my medical bag. I slipped on my coat, not even bothering to change out of my scrubs. The night was cold, and the wind bit at my face as I hurried down the quiet, dark street toward the Hendersons' house. I knocked quickly, and the door swung open almost immediately. Mrs. Henderson stood there, her eyes wide and frantic, her gray hair disheveled as if she'd been running her hands through it in worry. "Thank you for coming, Chloe," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He just collapsed. I don't know what happened." "It's okay, Mrs. Henderson," I said gently, placing a reassuring hand on her arm as I stepped inside. "Take me to him." She led me into the living room, where Mr. Henderson was lying on the floor, his skin pale and clammy. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow, each breath rattling with a troubling wheeze. I knelt beside him, my hands moving automatically as I assessed his condition. Years of experience had trained me to stay calm in situations like this, but there was always a knot of anxiety when it was someone you knew, someone who had a life and a family, someone you might pass on the street or chat with at the mailbox. "Mr. Henderson." I called softly, checking his pulse. It was weak, but it was there. His breathing was labored, and he was sweating profusely. A quick glance around the room showed no signs of injury or a fall, but his condition was serious. "Mrs. Henderson, has he been ill recently? Any new medications?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and steady to avoid alarming her further. "No, nothing new," she said, wringing her hands. "He's been feeling a bit tired lately, but we thought it was just, old age." "Did he mention any chest pain or discomfort?" I asked, my mind running through possible causes. "He did say his chest felt tight earlier today, but he brushed it off," she replied, her voice trembling. "Oh, Chloe, I should have made him see the doctor." "It's not your fault," I said quickly, glancing up at her. "It could be a heart issue, but I'm not sure yet. We need to get him to the hospital." She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, and I could see the tears welling up. "I'll call an ambulance." I held up a hand. "I think we should get him there ourselves. He's stable for now, but it's faster if we take him directly. Do you have the car keys?" She nodded quickly and hurried to fetch them. I carefully helped Mr. Henderson into a sitting position, trying to be as gentle as possible. He moaned softly, his eyes fluttering open for a moment. "Chloe," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm here, Mr. Henderson," I said softly. "We're going to get you to the hospital, okay? You're going to be fine." He nodded weakly, his hand gripping mine with what little strength he had left. Mrs. Henderson returned with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped them. "It's going to be okay, Mrs. Henderson," I reassured her. "Let's get him into the car." With her help, we managed to get Mr. Henderson to his feet and out to the car. The night was eerily quiet, the cold air stinging my cheeks as we carefully maneuvered him into the back seat. I climbed in beside him, checking his vitals again, while Mrs. Henderson took the wheel. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity, the silence in the car broken only by Mr. Henderson's labored breathing and Mrs. Henderson's occasional soft sobs. I kept a close eye on him, ready to act if his condition worsened, but we made it to the emergency room without incident. As soon as we arrived, the ER staff took over, wheeling Mr. Henderson away on a stretcher. I stayed by Mrs. Henderson's side as she filled out the necessary forms, her hands still trembling. "Thank you, Chloe," she whispered as she finished signing the last of the paperwork. "I don't know what we would have done without you." I smiled, trying to convey as much reassurance as I could. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad I was able to help." We sat together in the waiting room, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression grave but calm. "Mrs. Henderson," he called, and we both stood. "Yes, doctor," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's stable for now," the doctor said, his tone soothing. "It looks like he had a mild heart attack. We're going to run some more tests and keep him here for a few days for observation." Mrs. Henderson let out a shaky breath, relief flooding her features. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much." The doctor nodded, then turned to me. "You did the right thing getting him here quickly. It made all the difference." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion wash over me. "Just doing my job," I replied softly. After making sure Mrs. Henderson was settled, I'd finally headed home, the adrenaline that had kept me going fading away, leaving me utterly drained. The walk back to my apartment was quiet, the cold air biting at my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was still with the Hendersons, hoping that Mr. Henderson would recover quickly. When I pushed open the door to my apartment, I was greeted by the sight of Ethan sitting on the couch, wide awake despite the late hour. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Mom, you're home," he said, jumping up to hug me. "Hey, buddy," I said, wrapping my arms around him and breathing in his familiar scent. "Why aren't you in bed? It's way past your bedtime." "I wanted to wait for you," he said, looking up at me with those big brown eyes that always melted my heart. "I have something to tell you." "Oh? What's that?" I asked, brushing a strand of hair out of his face. "There's a man in the kitchen," he said, his voice full of excitement. "I found him outside when I was taking out the trash. He looked really hungry, so I brought him inside. Is that okay?" For a moment, I just stared at him, the events of the night catching up with me all at once. My mind raced, trying to process what he'd just said. "A man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Yeah," Ethan said, nodding eagerly. "He's really nice. I gave him some of the soup you made. He was really hungry." I sighed, feeling a mix of exhaustion and pride. Ethan had such a big heart, always thinking of others, just like his father had. "Okay, let's go meet him." We walked into the kitchen together, and there, sitting at the table, was an elderly man, his clothes worn and his face gaunt. He looked up as we entered, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for taking me in," he said in a raspy voice. "I didn't know where else to go." I smiled, though I felt the weight of the night pressing down on me. "It's no trouble. Are you feeling better after eating?" "Yes, thank you," he said, nodding. "It's been a long time since I've had a warm meal." Ethan beamed up at me, proud of what he'd done. "Can he stay with us, Mom? Just for tonight?" I looked at the old man, seeing the weariness in his eyes, the years of hardship etched into his face. How could I say no? "Of course he can stay," I said softly. "Let's get you a blanket and some clean clothes, sir." The man's eyes filled with tears, and he nodded, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you, miss. You're very kind." As I helped the man get settled, my thoughts drifted back to the ring the old man had slipped into my hand earlier, the one he said brought good luck and happiness. I didn't believe in magic or fate, but as I looked at my son's beaming face and the grateful old man, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, our luck was beginning to change. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of my small apartment, casting soft rays of light across the living room floor. The events of the previous night lingered in my mind like a vivid dream. I stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing out the coffee mug I had just used, my thoughts wandering back to the elderly man who had slept on my couch. His name was Walter, and he had appeared on my doorstep last night, cold and hungry. It had been Ethan's big heart that had brought him inside, offering him food and warmth without a second thought. I was proud of my son, but also concerned. We were barely getting by ourselves, and taking in a stranger, even for one night, felt like a risk. But there was something about Walter, an air of quiet dignity despite his ragged appearance, that made it impossible for me to turn him away. As I poured myself another cup of coffee, I heard the soft creak of the couch springs. Turning around, I saw Walter slowly sitting up, rubbing his eyes as he adjusted to the morning light. He looked frail, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to smooth out the blanket I had given him. "Good morning, Walter," I greeted him with a gentle smile. "Did you sleep well?" He looked up at me, his eyes still clouded with sleep but filled with gratitude. "Morning, Miss Chloe," he replied, his voice raspy from age and weariness. "I slept better than I have in a long time. Thank you for your kindness. I didn't mean to impose on you and your boy." "You weren't imposing at all," I assured him, walking over to the table and placing my cup down. "We were glad to help. Can I get you some breakfast? We have eggs, toast. It's not much, but it's something." Walter's face softened and he shook his head slightly. "You've already done more than enough. I don't want to take any more from you, but I appreciate it, truly." Before I could protest, Ethan came barreling into the room, his energy in stark contrast to the somber mood. "Good morning," he chirped, his face lighting up when he saw Walter was awake. "Did you sleep okay?" Walter chuckled softly, his demeanor warming in response to Ethan's bright smile. "I did, young man. Thank you. You've been very good to me." Ethan grinned proudly, then turned to me. "Mom, can Walter stay for breakfast? Please?" I looked between Ethan and Walter, my heart aching at the thought of sending the old man back out into the cold. But we had our own struggles, and I couldn't ignore them. Still, there was something about Walter that made it hard to turn him away. "Of course he can," I said finally, giving in to Ethan's enthusiasm. "Why don't you help me set the table?" As Ethan busied himself with plates and cutlery, I turned back to Walter. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Walter. I know things aren't easy out there." Walter's eyes moistened, and he nodded slowly. "You're a kind soul, Miss Chloe, but I don't want to be a burden. I've been on my own for a long time, and I've learned to get by. I just needed a little help this time." I studied him for a moment, seeing the wariness etched into the lines of his face. "Everyone needs help sometimes," I said gently. "And you're not a burden, if there's anything more we can do." Before I could finish, Walter reached into the pocket of his worn coat, his fingers trembling slightly as he pulled something out. "Actually, there is something I'd like to give you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not much, but it's something that's been in my family for a long time." He opened his hand, revealing a small, tarnished ring. The metal was dull, the once intricate design now worn smooth by time. But even in its worn state, there was something undeniably beautiful about it. The ring was simple, a single gemstone set in the center, catching the light in a way that made it seem to glow. I stared at the ring in his hand, surprised by the gesture. "Walter, I can't accept this," I said, shaking my head. "This is something special. It belongs with you." Walter smiled, a gentle, almost wistful smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "It's been in my family for generations," he explained softly. "My mother always told me it was a ring of good luck, that it brought happiness and protection to those who wore it. I never had much use for it myself, but I think it's found its new home." I felt a lump form in my throat as I listened to him speak. There was something deeply touching about the way he offered it, as if he truly believed it could bring me some measure of the luck and happiness that had eluded him. "I don't know what to say," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. This is too much, Walter." He shook his head again, more firmly this time. "No, it's not. You and your boy have given me more than you know. This ring, it's a small token of my gratitude. Please, take it." I hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out and took the ring from his hand. It was surprisingly warm, and as I slipped it onto my finger, it felt as though it had always belonged there. "Thank you, Walter," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure it." Walter nodded, a look of peace settling over his features. "I'm glad," he said softly. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Miss Chloe." Ethan, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. "Mom, does that mean we'll have good luck now?" Like, maybe you'll win the lottery or something. I laughed, ruffling his hair. Maybe, kiddo. But I think the best kind of luck is having people like Walter in our lives. Walter smiled at that, his eyes twinkling with a kind of quiet wisdom. Your mom's right, young man. Luck isn't always about money or things. Sometimes it's about the people you meet along the way. We finished breakfast in comfortable silence, the air filled with the warmth of shared company. Afterward, as I helped Walter gather his things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that his gift had marked the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. Before he left, I gave him a small bundle of food and a spare coat that had belonged to Ethan's father. You take care of yourself, Walter, I said, feeling a pang of sadness as I realized I might never see him again. I will, Miss Chloe, he promised, slipping the coat on with a grateful nod. And I'll be thinking of you and your boy. You've got a good heart. Don't ever lose that. As he walked out the door and disappeared down the street, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of loss, mixed with an equally strong feeling of hope. I looked down at the ring on my finger, the weight of it comforting in its small way. Mom. Ethan's voice broke through my thoughts, and I looked down at him. Do you think we'll ever see Walter again? I smiled, pulling him close. I don't know, buddy, but I think he'll always be with us in some way. Ethan nodded, satisfied with that answer, and together we watched as the sun climbed higher in the sky, filling our little apartment with light. And as the morning unfolded, I couldn't shake the feeling that Walter's gift, no matter how small or worn, was the start of something new, something that would change our lives in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The first snow of the season fell in delicate, lacy patterns against the window, transforming the world outside into a glistening winter wonderland. Inside, the apartment was warm and cozy, filled with the soft scent of pine from the small Christmas tree that stood proudly in the corner. Despite our tight budget, Ethan and I had managed to decorate it with a few handmade ornaments, and it brightened up our living room with its cheerful lights. As the holiday season approached, the weight of our financial struggles seemed to lift just a little. There was something magical about this time of year, something that made the challenges feel less overwhelming. Perhaps it was the festive spirit in the air, or maybe it was the ring Walter had given me, still sitting snugly on my finger, its presence a quiet reminder of his kindness and the strange, hopeful feeling that had settled into my heart since that morning. Mom, look. Ethan's excited voice pulled me out of my thoughts. He was holding up a brightly colored paper chain he'd made, his eyes shining with pride. Can we hang this on the tree? Of course we can, I replied with a smile, taking the chain from him. It'll look perfect. Ethan grinned and handed me the other end of the chain, and together we draped it around the tree, stepping back to admire our handiwork. It's starting to look really good, isn't it? He said, his face glowing with excitement. It is, I agreed, ruffling his hair. You did a great job, Ethan. As we stood there, admiring the tree, my mind drifted to the elderly residents at the nursing home where I had visited a few days ago. I had been thinking about them ever since, about how lonely they must feel during the holidays, with no family or friends to share it with. My heart ached at the thought, and I knew I wanted to do something to bring a little joy into their lives. Ethan, I said, turning to him, an idea forming in my mind. How would you like to help me with something special this Christmas? He looked up at me, his eyes wide with curiosity. What is it, Mom? Well, I began, kneeling down to his level. I've been thinking about the people in the nursing home. A lot of them don't have anyone to visit them during the holidays, and I thought maybe we could do something nice for them. Maybe we could buy them some gifts, make some cards. What do you think? Ethan's face lit up with enthusiasm. That sounds awesome. Can we get them lots of presents? I laughed softly, touched by his eagerness. We'll do what we can, sweetie. We don't have a lot of money, but I'm sure we can find something special for each of them. Ethan nodded eagerly, already lost in thoughts of what to get. We could make cookies, and maybe get some warm socks or blankets. Everyone likes being cozy, right? That's a great idea, I said, feeling a swell of pride for my son. Let's make a list of everything we want to do, and then we can go shopping tomorrow. As we sat down together to plan out our little project, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. It wasn't just about the gifts or the cards. It was about doing something meaningful, something that would bring happiness to others. And as I watched Ethan's face light up with each new idea, I realized that this was exactly what I needed too. The next day, we bundled up in our warmest coats and scarves and headed out into the crisp winter air. The streets were bustling with holiday shoppers, the store windows decked out in festive displays. Despite the crowds, there was a warmth and cheerfulness that made the whole city feel like one big celebration. We wandered through the shops, carefully picking out small, thoughtful gifts for the residents at the nursing home. Ethan was adamant about choosing something special for each person, insisting that everyone deserved to feel loved during the holidays. "Mom, do you think they'll like these?" Ethan asked, holding up a pair of soft, fuzzy slippers in a cheery shade of red. "They look really comfy." "I think they'll love them," I replied, smiling as I added them to our cart. "You're picking out some really great gifts." Ethan beamed, pleased with himself, and we continued browsing, selecting blankets, warm socks, and a few small trinkets that we thought would bring a smile to someone's face. I was careful to stay within our budget, but even with our limited funds, we managed to find some lovely things. By the time we returned home, our arms were full of shopping bags, and Ethan was practically bouncing with excitement. "I can't wait to see their faces when they open the presents," he exclaimed, his cheeks rosy from the cold. "I'm sure they'll be very happy," I said, feeling a sense of contentment settle over me. "You've done something really special, Ethan. I'm proud of you." That evening, we spent hours wrapping the gifts and making handmade cards to go along with each one. Ethan's artistic skills came in handy, and soon the table was covered in colorful paper, ribbons, and glitter. We worked late into the night, the warmth of the holiday spirit filling our small apartment. When we finally finished, we stood back to admire the pile of wrapped presents, each one carefully labeled with a name. "I think we're ready for our surprise visit," I said, giving Ethan a hug. "We'll head to the nursing home tomorrow and deliver these." The next morning, we loaded the car with the gifts and set off for the nursing home. The roads were slick with snow, but the city was alive with the holiday spirit, and the drive felt almost magical. When we arrived, the staff greeted us warmly, their eyes widening in surprise when they saw the pile of presents we carried in. "Are all of these for our residents?" one of the nurses asked, her voice filled with amazement. "Yes," I replied with a smile. "We wanted to do something special for them this Christmas." "That's incredibly kind of you," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "They're going to be so thrilled." Ethan and I began distributing the gifts, and as we walked through the halls, I could see the joy and surprise on the faces of the residents. Many of them hadn't received visitors in months, and the sight of a young boy with a big smile, handing out presents, brought tears to more than a few eyes. As we made our way to the common room, I noticed a man sitting alone by the window, his gaze distant as he watched the snow falling outside. There was something familiar about him, though I couldn't quite place it. "Excuse me," I said softly as we approached. "Would you like a gift? My son and I brought some for everyone." The man turned slowly to face us, and I gasped softly as recognition hit me. It was the man I had met the night before at the Hendersons, the doctor who had taken over Mr. Henderson's care. His name was Dr. Robert Ellis, a tall, handsome man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. I hadn't expected to see him here, of all places. "Chloe, right?" he said, a hint of surprise in his voice as he recognized me. "What a pleasant surprise. What brings you here?" "We're just spreading a little holiday cheer," I replied, smiling warmly. "What about you?" "I didn't expect to see you here." Dr. Ellis smiled, a bit sheepishly. "I volunteer here on the weekends, especially during the holidays. I find it grounding, and it's a good reminder of what really matters." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely impressed. "It's so important to give back, especially during this time of year." He nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at Ethan, who was busy chatting with one of the residents. "Your son has a big heart," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Just like his mother, I imagine." I felt my cheeks warm at the compliment, not used to receiving such praise. "Thank you. He's a good kid. I'm very lucky to have him." Dr. Ellis smiled, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than I expected. "Luck has a way of finding those who deserve it," he said, his voice gentle. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I just nodded, feeling a bit flustered. There was something about Dr. Ellis that made me feel at ease, yet slightly nervous at the same time. It wasn't often that someone paid me such close attention, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Before I could say anything else, Ethan came running over, his eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, Dr. Ellis said he'll help us hand out the rest of the gifts. Isn't that great?" I smiled at Ethan's enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, Ethan. Dr. Ellis, we'd love to have your help." "Of course," Dr. Ellis replied, his smile widening. "It would be my pleasure." Together, the three of us spent the next hour visiting each resident, delivering gifts and spreading holiday cheer. The atmosphere in the nursing home shifted from one of quiet melancholy to one of warmth and happiness, and by the time we finished, the room was filled with laughter and smiles. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Ellis walked us to the door. "Thank you, Chloe," he said, his voice sincere. "You and Ethan have made a real difference here today." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me at his words. "It was our pleasure. I'm glad we could bring a little joy to everyone." He hesitated for a moment, then looked at me with a hopeful expression. "Would you and Ethan like to join me for coffee sometime? I'd love to hear more about what inspired you to do this." I was taken aback by the invitation, but there was something in his eyes, something kind and genuine, that made me want to say yes. "That sounds nice," I said, smiling. "We'd like that." Dr. Ellis smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Great. I'll be in touch then." As Ethan and I left the nursing home, the cold winter air hit us, but I barely felt it. There was a warmth inside me, one that had nothing to do with the temperature. The day had been filled with surprises, some of them small, like the joy on the faces of the residents, and some of them unexpected, like the kindness and interest of Dr. Ellis. As we walked to the car, Ethan looked up at me, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Mom, do you think Dr. Ellis will be our friend now?" I smiled down at him, feeling hopeful for the first time in a long while. "I think he just might be, Ethan. I think he just might be." The week between Christmas and New Year's was always a strange limbo, a quiet time where the world seemed to slow down, waiting for the new year to arrive. After the excitement of our visit to the nursing home, the days had settled into a comfortable routine, but there was something different in the air, an undercurrent of anticipation that I couldn't quite place. Ethan had been bubbling with excitement ever since our outing, still riding the high of the joy we had brought to the elderly residents. His cheerful mood was contagious, and I found myself smiling more often, the weight of our financial worries lifting just a little. One chilly afternoon, Ethan and I were sitting on the couch, sipping hot cocoa and watching a movie. The snow had picked up outside, blanketing the city in white. The apartment was warm and cozy, the glow of the Christmas tree casting soft shadows on the walls. "Mom, can we do something fun for New Year's Eve?" Ethan asked, looking up at me with hopeful eyes. "Maybe we could watch the fireworks." I ruffled his hair, smiling at his excitement. "Of course we can. We'll find a good spot to watch them. Maybe we can make some snacks and have a little celebration at home too." "Yay!" Ethan cheered, his grin wide. "Can we invite Dr. Ellis?" I paused, surprised by the suggestion. Ethan had taken a real liking to Dr. Robert Ellis after our visit to the nursing home, and I couldn't deny that the thought of seeing him again made my heart skip a beat. But I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to invite him to spend New Year's Eve with us. After all, we didn't know him that well yet. "Maybe," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "We'll see if he's free, but even if he can't come, we'll still have a great time." Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer and returned his attention to the movie. As I watched him, my mind drifted to the ring Walter had given me. It was strange, but ever since I'd started wearing it, things had been different. There was a sense of hope that hadn't been there before, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around. That thought was interrupted by the sound of my phone ringing on the coffee table. I reached for it, glancing at the screen to see an unfamiliar number. Frowning slightly, I answered. "Hello." "Hello, is this Chloe Anderson?" A woman's voice asked, formal and businesslike. "Yes, this is she," I replied, sitting up a little straighter. "Ms. Anderson, this is Lisa from the state lottery office. I'm calling to inform you that you've won the lottery jackpot." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "You've won the lottery jackpot," she repeated patiently. "Your ticket was drawn as the winning number in the most recent lottery, and we wanted to confirm your details so we can process your prize." I stared at the phone in disbelief. This had to be some kind of mistake. I didn't even remember buying a lottery ticket, unless... The memory hit me suddenly. A few days before Christmas, I had stopped at a small convenience store to pick up some milk on my way home from work. On a whim, and with a little encouragement from the store clerk, I had bought a single lottery ticket. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time, just a silly impulse purchase. But now... I don't believe it, I stammered, feeling a strange mix of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a growing sense of excitement. "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am," Lisa said with a hint of amusement in her voice. "We double-checked the numbers. You're the winner." I felt like I was in a dream, floating above my own body as I tried to process the news. How much did I win? "The jackpot amount is $5 million, she said calmly, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. $5 million. The words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. This was life-changing money, the kind of money that could solve all of our problems, the kind of money I had only ever dreamed of. "Ms. Anderson." Lisa's voice brought me back to reality. "I know this is a lot to take in. We'll need you to come down to the office to verify your ticket and claim your prize. We can set up an appointment for you as soon as possible." "Yes, of course," I said quickly, trying to sound composed even though my heart was racing. "Thank you." After setting up the appointment, I hung up the phone, my hands trembling slightly as I set it down. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the blank screen, trying to process what had just happened. "Mom?" Ethan's voice broke through my thoughts, and I turned to see him looking at me with concern. "Is everything okay?" I blinked, forcing myself to focus on him. "Ethan, I think everything's going to be more than okay." My voice was shaky, but I couldn't stop the smile that spread across my face. He tilted his head, confused. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, still trying to believe the words I was about to say. "We just won the lottery." Ethan's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stared at me, as if he wasn't sure whether to believe it. "Really?" "Really," I confirmed, my smile growing wider. "We won $5 million, Ethan. We're going to be okay." Ethan's face lit up with pure, unfiltered joy, and he launched himself at me, wrapping his arms around my neck in a tight hug. "Mom, this is amazing. We can get a bigger apartment, and new toys, and you won't have to worry about money anymore." I hugged him back, tears of happiness springing to my eyes. "Yes, baby. We can do all of that. We can do whatever we want." As we sat there, holding each other, I felt a deep sense of relief wash over me. For so long, I had been struggling, worrying about how we would make it through each month, how I would provide for Ethan and keep a roof over our heads. And now, all of that stress, all of that fear, was lifting away. But more than that, I felt an overwhelming gratitude for Walter, for the ring, for the strange twist of fate that had led me to this moment. Maybe there really was something special about that ring, something that had brought a little bit of magic into our lives. The rest of the day passed in a blur of excitement and disbelief. I called the lottery office again to confirm the details and arrange for someone to watch Ethan while I went to the appointment the next day. Every time I thought about the amount of money we had won, it felt surreal, like a dream I might wake up from at any moment. That evening, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at me with wide, excited eyes. "Mom, does this mean we're rich now?" I smiled, brushing a stray curl away from his forehead. "I guess it does, sweetheart. But remember, money doesn't change who we are. It just gives us more options." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious for a moment before he broke into a grin. "Can we still invite Dr. Ellis for New Year's?" I laughed softly, touched by his insistence. "Yes, Ethan. I'll call him tomorrow and see if he's free." Ethan's smile widened, and he snuggled deeper into his blankets. "This is going to be the best New Year's ever," he murmured, his voice already sleepy. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "Yes, it is. Sweet dreams, baby." As I left his room and closed the door softly behind me, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of emotions. Happiness, relief, excitement, all of those were there, but so was something else, something quieter and more profound. This money was going to change our lives, no doubt about that. But I knew that it wasn't just the money that had made this time so special. It was the people we had met, the kindness we had shared, and the hope that had blossomed in our hearts. That was the real gift, the one that had made all of this possible. The next day, after dropping Ethan off with a neighbor, I headed to the lottery office, still feeling like I was in a dream. The city was bustling with activity, everyone hurrying about their business, but for me, the world had slowed down, each moment feeling significant and new. When I arrived at the office, I was greeted warmly by the staff, who walked me through the process of verifying my ticket and claiming my prize. It all felt surreal. Signing the paperwork, discussing the options for receiving the money, hearing the congratulations from the staff. As I left the office, the check in my hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. We were freed from the constant worry, the stress of making ends meet. We had been given a new start, a chance to build a life filled with security and happiness. That evening, back at the apartment, I called Dr. Ellis. The conversation was light and easy, and I found myself smiling more than I had in a long time. "Robert," I said, trying out the familiarity of his first name, "Ethan and I would love for you to join us for New Year's Eve. We're planning a small celebration at home, and we'd be honored if you could come." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice was warm and filled with genuine pleasure. "I'd love to, Chloe. Thank you for inviting me. I've been thinking about you and Ethan a lot these past few days." A flutter of something warm and hopeful stirred in my chest. "We've been thinking about you too," I admitted, feeling a little shy but happy. "I'm looking forward to spending the evening with you," Robert said, his voice soft. "And Chloe, I'm glad things are looking up for you. You deserve this happiness." "Thank you," I said, my voice barely a whisper, filled with the emotions I couldn't quite put into words. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the apartment, the modest space that had been our home for so long. It wasn't just the money that had changed our lives. It was the connections we had made, the people who had come into our lives at just the right time. And as the snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in a blanket of white, I knew that the new year was going to bring more than just a change in our financial situation. It was going to bring new beginnings, new relationships, and a future that, for the first time in a long time, felt bright and full of promise. The new year arrived with a crisp winter chill, but inside our apartment, everything felt warm and alive. It was as if the air itself was infused with hope, buzzing with the energy of new possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, a deep-seated assurance that things were going to be okay. Better than okay, even. They were going to be wonderful. New Year's Eve had been a magical night. Ethan, Robert, and I had spent the evening together, enjoying the little celebration we'd planned. We'd watched movies, played board games, and made popcorn. As the clock struck midnight, we toasted with sparkling cider, our laughter mingling with the distant sound of fireworks. Robert had stayed late into the night, and when he finally left, there was a lingering warmth in the air. A sense of something new blossoming between us. It wasn't just a friendship, but the beginning of something deeper, something that made my heart flutter with anticipation. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. With the money from the lottery, I was able to settle all of our debts and secure a more comfortable future for Ethan and me. The first thing I did was move us into a new home, a beautiful, spacious apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was everything I had ever dreamed of for us, and when Ethan saw his new room, his face lit up with pure joy. "Mom, look at how big it is," Ethan exclaimed, running from one end of the room to the other. "I can finally have all my toys out at once." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me as I watched him. "You sure can, buddy, and we can decorate it any way you want." Ethan paused, looking around the room with wide eyes. "Can we paint it blue? Like the sky?" "Absolutely," I said, smiling down at him. "We can make it just like the sky. Maybe even add some stars if you want." His eyes sparkled with excitement. Yes, stars would be perfect. As we settled into our new home, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed in such a short time. It wasn't just the material comforts, the bigger apartment, the new furniture, or the lack of financial stress. It was the feeling of security, of knowing that we had a future filled with promise. It was the knowledge that I could provide for Ethan in a way I never could before. But it wasn't just about the money. The real treasure was the sense of community we had found, the connections we had made. Walter's gift had set off a chain of events that had brought us so much more than just financial security. It had brought us happiness, friendship, and love. One afternoon, a few weeks after we'd moved into the new apartment, I received a call from the nursing home where Walter was staying. The nurse on the other end of the line was kind, her voice filled with compassion as she explained that Walter's health was declining. "He's been asking for you, Chloe," she said gently. "I think it would mean a lot to him if you could visit." I felt a lump form in my throat. Walter had become like family to us, and the thought of losing him was painful. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised. When I arrived at the nursing home, the atmosphere was quiet and serene, the winter light filtering softly through the windows. I made my way to Walter's room, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the inevitable, and gratitude for the time we had shared. Walter was sitting up in bed when I entered, looking frailer than the last time I'd seen him. But his eyes lit up when he saw me, and he reached out a hand. "Chloe," he said, his voice raspy but filled with warmth. "I'm so glad you came." I took his hand, squeezing it gently as I sat down beside him. "Of course, Walter. I'm here. How are you feeling?" He smiled faintly, a little mischievous twinkle in his eye. "Old. But that's nothing new, is it?" I chuckled softly, trying to keep my tone light even though my heart was heavy. "You're as sharp as ever." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Walter spoke again, his tone more serious. "I've been thinking a lot lately, Chloe. About life, about family. And I want you to know that meeting you and Ethan has been one of the greatest joys of my life." His words brought tears to my eyes, and I squeezed his hand a little tighter. "Walter, you've brought so much joy to us too. We're so grateful for you." He nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "That ring I gave you, it's been in my family for generations. I wasn't sure if it really had any special powers, but I hoped it would bring you the happiness you deserve. It seems it did." I smiled through my tears, touched by his sentiment. "It did, Walter, it really did. But it wasn't just the ring, it was you. You've changed our lives in ways I can't even begin to describe." He patted my hand gently. "I'm glad to hear that. And I'm glad you found someone who cares about you." He paused, his eyes twinkling again. "That Dr. Ellis seems like a good man." I blushed slightly, surprised by his observation. "He is. We've been spending a lot of time together." Walter's smile widened. "Good. You deserve to be happy, Chloe. You and Ethan both." We spent the next hour talking, reminiscing about the time we'd shared and the memories we'd made. When it was time for me to leave, I leaned in and kissed Walter's forehead, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. "Thank you, Walter," I whispered, "for everything." He smiled up at me, his eyes filled with a quiet peace. "Take care of yourself, Chloe, and take care of that little boy of yours. He's a special one." As I left the nursing home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for Walter and the gift of his friendship. I knew that he wouldn't be with us much longer, but I also knew that his memory would live on in our hearts forever. That evening, as I sat in our new apartment, I thought about the journey we had been on, the challenges we had faced, the people we had met, and the unexpected twists of fate that had led us to this moment. Life had a funny way of surprising you when you least expected it, of bringing people into your life who would change it in ways you never could have imagined. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts, and I stood up to answer it. When I opened the door, I found Robert standing there, a bottle of wine in one hand and a warm smile on his face. "Robert," I said, pleasantly surprised. "What a nice surprise." "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, stepping inside when I motioned for him to come in. "I just wanted to stop by and see how you were settling in." "Not at all," I replied, closing the door behind him. "We're doing great. Ethan's already made a mess of his room, but he's happy, and that's what matters." Robert laughed, setting the bottle of wine on the kitchen counter. "I'm glad to hear it. And how about you, Chloe? How are you holding up?" I paused, considering his question. "I'm good," I said, smiling softly. "Better than I've been in a long time. It's been a whirlwind, but I'm grateful for everything that's happened. I feel like we're finally where we're meant to be." Robert's expression softened, and he took a step closer to me. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Chloe. I've seen how hard you've worked, how much you've sacrificed for Ethan. And now it's time for you to enjoy the life you've built." His words touched me deeply, and I felt a lump form in my throat. Thank you, Robert. That means a lot. He reached out, gently taking my hand in his. I've been thinking a lot about us, Chloe, about where this is going, and I want you to know that I'm here for you, for both you and Ethan. Whatever you need, whatever you want, I'm here. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to my eyes, and I squeezed his hand, feeling a warmth spread through me. I want you in our lives, Robert. You've already become so important to us. I care about you. He smiled, a tender look in his eyes as he reached up to brush a tear from my cheek. I care about you too, Chloe, more than I can put into words. In that moment, standing there in the kitchen of our new home, I felt a sense of completeness that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about the money or the security, it was about the love and connection that had blossomed in our lives, the people who had come into our world and made it brighter. As Robert leaned in and kissed me softly, I felt a surge of hope and happiness. This was our new beginning, a fresh start filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a bright future. And as we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together with the strength of our love and the support of the new family we had found. It was a new chapter in our lives.